materials, enabling participants to deepen their understanding and actively engage in the diverse dimensions of Quranic scholarship. The webinars brings together academia, researchers, scholars, and practitioners to discuss the Quranic studies under the title Al-Quran and Late Antique Material Pre-Quranic Texts, Post-Biblical Texts, Intertextuality, and the History of Quran's Horizon. So let's open our agenda today by reciting Basmalah together. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Well, audiences, is it the Professor Zahiron comes here? No? Okay. Maybe it will take in the next sessions. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, we have come to the core agenda for our meeting, which is to hear the speech from our lecturer today, the Professor Gabriel Seth Reynolds. The webinar will be moderated by Anas Roli Mukhlisin, SAGMA. So here's the following is the brief educational biography of the Anas Roli Mukhlisin. Let me to read first. He earned his bachelor's degree in the Quran and Tafsir Science from the Sunan Kalijaga State Islamic University, Yogyakarta, and he completed his first master degree in the study of religion at the University of Toronto, Canada. Then he obtained his second master degree in the contemporary Islamic studies from the Hamad bin Khalifa University, Qatar. And currently, he is pursuing his doctoral degree in the study of religion at Harvard University. Oh, the professor Sahiron is come here. Is coming here? Not yet. Okay. So for the Anas and the Professor Gabriel Cetrino, the time and place are yours.
Thank you so much, Muhammad Rashad, for your very kind introduction. And let me begin by greeting our esteemed speaker. Good morning, Professor Gabriel.
Good morning. Thank you, Anna.
You're most welcome. We are so fortunate to have you today as our guest speaker. And welcome everyone to our online academic discussion on the Quran and late antique materials. I am Anas Roli Mukhlisin, and I am honored to serve as the moderator for this event. I'd like to begin by thanking again our esteemed speaker, all audiences, and the organizers for making this event possible. As the moderator, my role is to facilitate a productive and respectful conversation. To ensure a smooth session, I kindly request that everyone keep their microphones muted unless they are speaking. And during our Q&A session at the end, if you have questions, please raise your hands and we will give you time to deliver your questions as concisely as possible. And before we begin, let me introduce our esteemed speaker who doesn't really need more introduction because everyone who is working on Quranic studies must encounter his name very often. Professor Gabriel Said Reynolds is a professor of Islamic Studies and Theology at the University of Notre Dame. And okay, so I just get notifications that the keynote speaker is joining with us today. So we will give time to him, and I will give this to a master ceremony again.
Okay, thank you for introduction first. Hello, the Professor Sahiron. Are you here? Assalamualaikum. Okay, so the connection is trouble from the Professor Sahiran. So let's continue for Mr. Anas. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So let's resume our session then. So let me repeat our introduction to Professor Gabriel. He is professor in Islamic Studies and Theology at the University of Notre Dame, and he obtained his PhD from Yale University. He has conducted extensive research on the Quran and Christian-Muslim relations. Um, some of his publications include Allah, God in the Quran, in which Professor Gabriel argues that the Quran describes God as both merciful and wrathful. And the second is the Quran and the Bible, text and commentary. And I would say that this book is one of the primary sources that we are using here at Harvard when it comes to studying the Quran and the Bible. And the third one is the Quran and its biblical subtext, in which Professor Gabriel argues that it is better for us to read the Quran in conversation with what came before it, not with what came after it. Interestingly, Professor Gabriel also runs a YouTube channel exploring the Quran and the Bible. So please don't forget to subscribe it, like, share, and comment. Okay, dear participants, let's welcome our esteemed speaker, Professor Gabriel Said Reynolds, who will be sharing his expertise on this field. Please join me in giving him a virtual round of applause. Dear Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Anas Muhammad, can you hear me okay? Is my audio okay?
Yes, your audio is very clear.
Thank you so much. And Muhammad, Fawzi, Anas, if Professor Sahiran is able to connect, please interrupt me. It's no problem. Okay, so at any point when he can connect, I'm happy to give him the time for his keynote address. It's no problem. So, friends, let me please allow me to begin with just a few thank yous. I'll be very quick. I think my time to speak is about 40 minutes altogether. Here in the United States, it's still the morning. So in Indiana, it's 8:10 a.m. as it is for Anas in Boston. And so I'll speak into about 8:50, maybe 8:55. Um, and then I will be very eager to have your questions and comments. In just a moment, I'll share my screen, but not yet because I'd like to say a few thank yous. So thank you, first of all, to Muhammad for being the Master of Ceremonies this evening in Indonesia. Thank you to Fawzi for so patiently corresponding with me and arranging this event. I'm really grateful that El Brandstock reaches out to someone in the United States who's not a Muslim, who works on the Quran, from historical critical perspective. So this shows the generosity and the intellectual curiosity of Fawzi and the El Brandstock movement. Thank you very much for your confidence and trust in me. What you'll have today won't be perfect, but hopefully a little bit useful. Thank you very much to Anas for being here, also waking up early like me. And joining me. And Anas, I look forward to more connections here in the United States and hopefully having you to Notre Dame. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be at the same event with Professor Sahiran Shamsuddin, and I look forward to him joining whenever possible. I understand that Brandstock and Professor Shamsuddin are connected with Istiqlal Mosque in Jakarta, and I understand its symbolic and real importance in religion and society in Indonesia. So that's a great honor to be connected to the Istiqlal Mosque, even virtually. Inshallah, someday I can visit in person. And then finally, just thank you to my colleague and friend Munim Suri, who works with me at the University of Notre Dame. Probably everyone knows his works. He's written quite a bit, both in Bahasa Indonesian and in English, and he's taught me a lot about the intellectual currents, all of the movements, religious thought in Indonesia, and that's been a blessing for me. So if the time is right, I'll go ahead and share my screen now. Is that okay, Mohammed and Fawzi? Okay, so let's see if this works properly. Okay, and Anas, is this looking okay, my PowerPoint for you?
Yes, it is very clear, Professor.
Okay, great. So I'll be speaking about the theme, the Quran, and late antique materials. And I mean, some of the images I put up are not very serious. They're just for fun. So don't worry about them if they seem not connected to the main topic. I'll be addressing this topic in 4 steps. So first, I'll look at traditional ideas about Christianity and Islam's emergence. I will focus more on Christianity than Judaism for 2 reasons. One reason is I know Christianity better, but the second reason is that I believe Christianity was more important to Islam's emergence than Judaism, and we can speak about that. The second step will be Christianity in the Quran, so surahs or passages that engage with Christianity. And then the third step will be historical evidence for Christianity in Arabia. And then the fourth step, really just a conclusion, very quickly, will be about theology, the Quran's theology and Christianity. So hopefully that sounds okay. We'll start then with traditional ideas. By traditional ideas, I mean basically traditional ideas in Western scholarship, if that makes sense. So I'm not speaking about, what does tafsir or qasas al-anbiya or kutub al-tarikh, what these say about Christianity. I mean early Orientalists, what they thought about Christianity and Islam. Okay, because my approach will be different from the approach of the early Orientalists. And you can read this quotation from the Scottish scholar Richard Bell in his book, The Origin of Islam in its Christian Environment, which more or less expresses the standard idea of early Orientalists that Christianity was not very important to Arabia in Muhammad's time. Okay, so but I'll start just by noting there are pieces of the Sirah, Sirah an-Nabawiyya, that early Orientalists looked at in order to form their impression. And most famously is the reference to Warqa ibn Nawfal, which occurs, of course, at the beginning of the story of the Prophet's life in the book, in Ibn Ishaq and other Sirahs. And of course, Warqa is described by Ibn Ishaq as a Christian. So who read the Torah, read the Gospel, and one imagines he would have done so in Arabic. So these little narratives in the Sirah were important for the Orientalists. And generally, they concluded that, okay, there were a few Christians around, like Warqa in Arabia, but mostly Christianity was far away from Mecca. So maybe in Najran in the south or Syria in the north, but not in Arabia. So Bell says, for example, well, maybe 1 or 2 Christians arrived in Mecca with camel riders or caravans. Bell also thinks more generally, this is a very interesting topic actually, that even without the influence of Christians among the Arabs just before Islam, there was like almost this instinctual, natural movement towards monotheism. So you see that quotation. Uh, the English scholar, much more recent than Bell, Jez Hotting, this is not his view, but he says people like Bell were influenced by an idea among Western scholars in terms of the evolutionary development of religion within all humans, like humans as a species. And so many Western scholars studying more from like an anthropological perspective had this idea that humans generally moved from polytheism to monotheism almost as a part of evolution, almost as a part of biological evolution. And so they say this was happening among the Arabs. And I mean, just to note, they would say, well, it looks like from the Quran itself that the Arabs who rejected Muhammad, even they had become something like monotheists. So you see um, the passage from Al-Ankabut and Quran 31 as well, where the so-called mushrikun, um, they affirm that God, Allah, is God, and that God, Allah, is the creator. Okay, so early Orientalists, they looked at the story of, say, Waraqa, and they looked at the material in the Quran about the mushrikun, and they had two conclusions. One is, well, there were one or two Christians around, but not really important Christian communities. And two, all of the Arabs were kind of moving naturally towards monotheism. Okay, so another interesting theme in early Orientalists thinking about Christianity and Islam's emergence is that the Christians that Muhammad might have met would not have been so-called Orthodox Christians. So they would have been Christian groups whose ideas and whose practices were unusual. They would probably use the English word heretical. So you can read this quotation from an American scholar writing over 100 years ago, who said, listen, if Muhammad had met true Christians, authentic Christians, things would have been different. But the few Christians in his mind who made it to Arabia, they were superstitious, essentially polytheistic, etc. So we could speak about that. You even see it here from a much more famous scholar who I think was at Harvard, Anas Hamilton Gibb. I think he was English British, um, and you can say that he also sees the Christians who were in Arabia as heretical Christians. I can explain that term, heretical, in the question and answer. It's not usually used in the context of Islam, but it's very important in the context of Christian studies. The idea that Christians were far away from Mecca is not only an idea of early Orientalists. It's still probably the standard idea, but things are beginning to change. But much more recently, Aziz al-Azmeh, a scholar, of Arab Muslim background, but who works in the West, basically as a historical critical scholar, wrote this very, very important book, The Emergence of Islam. And basically, he affirms the position of the early Orientalists. And he uses this very strange term that Mecca was a pagan reservation. So he would say, listen, maybe there were Christians in Egypt, maybe there were Christians in Ethiopia, Syria, Yemen, Iraq, Palestine, but there were really no Christians around Mecca, the so-called Hejaz, Western Arabia. There were really no Christians there. It was like a pagan island in a Christian sea. That's his position. So there's that other quotation, which I won't speak about now. Okay, so that's the end of part one. On to part two. And the goal of part two is to look at the Quran itself and how it engages with Christianity, and to ask the question, does the evidence of the Quran support the idea of early Orientalists or Aziz al-Azmeh that Christianity was not an important presence in Mecca and the Hijaz. Okay, so that's kind of the question I'd like to ask here. If it's okay, Anas and everyone, just I'll make a brief comment on this image here. It's very interesting. This is part of a work of art by an American artist. His name is Sandow Birk. You can look him up on Google. The entire work of art is available on his website. You can download the whole work of art. And what he did was to write out an English translation of the Quran. So it's not Arabic, it's not a mushaf, it's just an English translation. And every page has images from American life that correspond with the surah. So this is Surah Al-Kahf, but instead of a traditional image of Ashab al-Kahf, he has an image of Americans working in a mine, like, where you like to get a mine for coal or for iron. So it's very, very interesting. Again, the artist is Sandow Birk. Okay, on to the question of what does the Quran show of knowledge of Christianity? Okay, the first point I'd like to make is that the Quran uses biblical phrases. And by biblical phrases, I don't mean here stories, say, of Adam or Abraham or Joseph. I just mean phrases, so short statements. If you know the Bible, you might recognize these as being connected, but it's also possible, if you didn't study the Bible in your religious education, that you've heard these phrases many times and not realized there is a connection. So in Al-Araf, Quran 7, we have this reference to someone who denies the sign of God not going into Jannah until the camel passes through the needle's eye. حتى يلج الجمل في السم الخياط. Okay, this is a very, very famous phrase for Christians coming from the Bible. So, for example, it appears in the Gospel of Matthew, here where Jesus says in the Gospel of Matthew. Now, in the Quran, it's not a statement of Jesus. It's a statement of God. In the Gospel of Matthew, it's a statement of Jesus. Jesus said to his disciples, it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for someone rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. It's not an exact quotation, but you can see the theme or the image of the camel and the needle. Another example is this phrase we find in two places in the Quran. So, for example, in Al-Baqarah, where the Jews, the opponents of the Prophet in Medina, they say قُلُوبُنَا غُلْفٌ. So there's a lot to be said about this phrase. It's a little complicated, but I mean, usually it's understood by both tafsir and Western scholars to mean our hearts are uncircumcised. Again, in An-Nisa, we have the same phrase, قُلُوبُنَا غُلْفٌ. It's attributed to the Jews, which is important because in the Bible, this image of an uncircumcised heart is a very common way of criticizing the Jews. So we have it both in the first part of the Bible, the Old Testament, and the Christian second part of the Bible, the New Testament. I'll try to explain these references. So the New Testament has 4 books that are all called Gospels. The first of them is Matthew. In the 5th book in the New Testament is called the Acts of the Apostles. I could say more about this maybe later if it's interesting, but in the Acts of the Apostles, there's a man, his name is Stephen, this is not Jesus, Stephen, who speaks of the Jews as having uncircumcised hearts. So it's a very common phrase. I've written an article on biblical turns of phrase in the Quran, so there's many more examples of this. So I'll just go quickly through a couple more. The Quran and the Bible speak of small things by using the image of the mustard seed. The Quran in the Bible used the phrase lamhat al-basar, so the twinkling or the short glance of the eye. The number 70 and forgiveness is found in both in the Quran and the Bible. I'm going quickly now. I know there's this very interesting case in Al-Baqarah, but not only in Al-Baqarah, there's a second case of this where the Quran, speaking about the Israelites, has them say, Sami'na wa asayna. And this is very close to something in the Bible. It's actually the reverse of what we find in the Bible. But even the Arabic is close to the Hebrew of these biblical books. So these are books from the first part of the Bible, the Old Testament. This is the fifth book called Deuteronomy. This is a second book called Exodus. I could explain more, but I think for the argument, it's not very important right now. Another example, this is from the New Testament. It's one of the letters of St. Paul in the New Testament. Okay, two things just to note about these phrases. Although there are examples where you have a Jewish phrase, most of them are Christian. Most of them are from the New Testament. And the second point is they are not exactly the same in the Quran. So the Quran uses them for a new point, for its own argument. Okay, so it's not that these phrases are simply repeated from the Bible or translated from the Bible. They're used in a new way in the Quran. Okay, in the Quran, not only do we have references to phrases, I'll be very quick here, but as many people might know, we have many stories in the Quran that are familiar to Christians. And it's important to note that stories in the Quran that involve figures from the Old Testament, the first half of the Bible, in the Quran, they have details which show that the Quran is engaging with the Christian version of this Old Testament story. So we shouldn't assume that because the story is in the first half of the Bible, that it's connected to Judaism. Christians also read the first half of the Bible. I won't go into detail. I could speak about this later. But for example, there are stories in Sujud al-Malaika. There are details there which show it's connected to Christianity. Even in the story of Joseph, who of course is from the book of Genesis, so the first half of the Bible, but there are details which show that it came from Christian sources. And then there are stories not in the Bible, but which were told by Christians like Ashab al-Kahf or Dhul Qarnayn. I'm not going to speak a lot about this now. Okay, so I mean, the point of that section is just to say the Quran seems to engage in a very important way with Christian language and with Christian stories. And why would a scripture engage so importantly with Christian ideas, words, phrases, stories? Probably because for the scripture, for the Quran, this was a way to make a connection with its audience. It speaks of uncircumcised hearts or a mustard seed, or tells the story of Ashab al-Kahf because it knows that this is familiar to its audience. So hopefully what I've done in part 1 and part 2 is clear, right? The early Orientalists say there were not a lot of Christians, but the Quran, I think, suggests by its references to Christianity that there were a lot of Christians in Arabia. Okay, so let's go to the historical data now. Let's test my theory. I hope this is making sense. So part 3 of the talk is to test the theory that there were a lot of Christians by looking at some of the data, the historical data now. Okay, I mean I have this quotation from a Nahl here from the Quran because here there's a direct accusation by the opponents of Muhammad that he's being taught by a bashar, by a human. And then there's this comment like the response of the Quran is to speak about the lisan, right? The speech, the lisan. And the Quran says, well, our lisan is Arabian Mubin, but this person, this bashar, his lisan is Ajami. Ajami. It, people debate this. Anas, I don't know what Mohsen would say about this, but it's possible that Ajami means a non-Arabic lisan. If that's the case, then we have a reason to believe that in Mecca, maybe, because Nahl is supposed to be Meccan Surah, there were at least two languages. There was not only Arabic, there was also this Ajami language. And we can ask, oh, what would it be? What would be this Ajami language? What is the non-Arabic language? And we can, well, it will come up. It will come up. Okay, so I'd like to make a few comments about the historical context, but especially about the spread of Christianity in the Middle East, let's say by the year 600. So in the Miladi Christian dates, the traditional date of the Prophet's ministry begins in 610. When Mount Hira and Surat al-Alaq, all of that, 610. So let's just think, where was Christianity in the Middle East around 600? Okay, so we have this map here, just identify a few things. So here's Mecca, here's Medina, here's Yemen, okay, and then here's Syria, and basically all of this is the Byzantine Empire, okay? So the capital of the Byzantine Empire is Constantinople, today Istanbul. The important cities are Alexandria in Egypt, Antioch, today in Turkey, Damascus in Syria, and Jerusalem. Okay? Now, the Byzantine Empire was a multi-ethnic, multilingual empire. Okay, so the official language of the Byzantine Empire was Greek, and I could explain why it was Greek, but that's another story. Okay, but in this area, especially Syria, Palestine, Northern Arabia, there were two other languages. So Greek was sort of the official language. Most people in this area, they spoke, I didn't mean to do that. They spoke a language called Aramaic, which is the same as Syriac. If you've heard the word Syriac, it's just another name for Aramaic. So most people here spoke Aramaic or Syriac, but there were also many Arabic speakers, not only down here in Mecca and Medina, but our Arabic inscriptions go all the way up to the borders of what is now Turkey. We have Arabic, in fact, the first Arabic inscription comes from Syria, the earliest one from the 4th century, in Arabic script. Okay, so so there were a lot of Arabic speakers here. And the important point, and this is emphasized by David Bertena in his excellent article here, the important point is many of these Arabic speakers had become Christians. In fact, the most famous Arab state before Islam, which is known as the Ghassanids or sometimes the Jaffnids, the most important Arabic state before Islam, which was semi-independent from the Byzantines. It was a Christian, completely Christian state. Okay, it was centered in Syria, a place called Jabia, and I'll say a little bit more about them. Some other things to note. Jacob of Surug, he was a bishop up here in Turkey, but already in 518, he wrote a letter to Christians in Himyar. Himyar is down here, is Yemen, Najran, right? So he's up here. He wrote a letter. We can think of the people who carried the letter on horses or camels. They probably came through this way. So he's a Christian bishop writing to Christians in South Arabia. So we just imagine news about Christianity between believers and bishops is passing like this. Okay? As I mentioned, the Jaffnids, Ghassanids were Christians. And they were not only in Syria, as David Bertena says, the Jaffnids, they were in charge of Arabia. Arabia means this area here in this context, Lebanon, and then the Sinai, Nabatea, so this is Jordan, and the Northern Arabian Peninsula. So basically, this whole area up to cities like Dumat Jandal, north of Medina. They didn't stretch down to Medina or Mecca, but what is now northern Saudi Arabia. And we know from inscriptions and from their names that they were Arabs, but when they wrote in Syriac or Aramaic. Okay, their most important king was Al-Harith ibn Jabala. His name is Arabic. He ruled in 2569, and he appointed a bishop named Theodore specifically for the Arabic-speaking communities. Okay, so you go on and on about this, but the point is there were many Christians among the Arabs. We know this from the historical accounts and the actual documents. They're not in Arabic, they're in Syriac or Greek from the Jaffnids or the Ghassanids. Okay, now when we get into inscriptions, we find that a lot of the pre-Islamic inscriptions, this is a study of Ahmad Jalad, are bilingual. And the bilingualism is between Arabic and Aramaic. So you can recognize some of this. This is Aramaic. Instead of hadha, the Arabic word hadha, it's dana, which is Aramaic for hadha, for this. And then qabr means tomb, that's Arabic. Bar means son in Aramaic. It's not ibn, it's Aramaic bar. The word for month is not shahr, Arabic shahr. It's yarah, which is Aramaic, so on and so forth. Okay, so we have these inscriptions that prove that people knew, Arabs also knew Aramaic. They had this bilingualism. Okay, we also have Arabic language, purely Arabic language inscriptions by Christians. So here's a nice example. This is in the 6th century, AD 548, 549. This is an inscription studied by Leila Name in Paris. She's in Paris. The inscription was from Dumat Jandal in Saudi Arabia. And this is actually in the Arabic script. 75 years before Islam. So you can even see dhikr here, dhikr, and then you see, instead of Allah, the way Allah is written, you can see El, Aleph, Lam, Hey, El, Ilah. Okay, and at the end of it, you have letters which represent numbers, which give us the date, and then you have a Christian cross. So we have Christians in what is today Saudi Arabia, north of Medina. It's about several hundred kilometers north of Medina, but still in what is today Saudi Arabia, 75 years before Islam, writing about Allah or Al-Ilah with a cross in Arabic script. So something changes around the year 500, where Christians are beginning to write in Arabic. So previously, we know Arab Christians were writing in Syriac. Now they're beginning to write in Arabic. Okay, here's another example of an inscription from the south now. So this is a different context. This is an inscription which some scholars call the pre-Islamic Basmala. This is actually in a different script. It's not in the Arabic script. It's in a South Arabian script, but the language is Arabic. So remember, this is before Islam. This is probably about the same time, 550, something like this, 6th century. Okay, this has also been studied by Ahmad Jalad. It was first studied by two Yemeni scholars, and then by Ahmad Jalad. And the interesting thing is, it seems to start with like Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, something like that. Bism, Ilah, Rahman, Rahman, Rabb, Samawat, Urzuqna min fadlika. So you can see this is Arabic, right? Not in the Arabic script. And the language is very interesting because of the way of referring to Allah also as Ar-Rahman. And the language is very close, also Rabb, Samawat, Rizq, Fadl, all of this is very Quranic language. Okay? So it's not clear that this was a Christian, excuse me, it's not clear that this was a Christian inscription. It could be Jewish. Possibly it could be neither Christian nor Jewish. I don't think so. I think it's either Christian or Jewish. Ahmed Jalad thinks that there are direct connections to one psalm, this is a book in the Old Testament. We could speak about that later. Okay, so what's interesting, especially about the first inscription I showed you, this one, is that we have the Arabic script. So now Arabs finally writing in Arabic. Okay, Robert Hoyland calls this an idea whose time had come. So we know that Christians, there were Christians among the Arabs from very early 3rd, 4th century, but they had always used non-Arabic languages. And about the year 500, they begin to use Arabic when they're writing. So this is a kind of revolution. Islam and the Quran is a revolution in the 7th century, but in the 6th century, there's a revolution where Arabic-speaking Christians begin to use the Arabic script and the Arabic language, and we know that from inscriptions. Now, something else that's very, very important. Right at the time that Arabic-speaking Christians begin to use the Arabic script, write in Arabic, the polytheistic inscriptions of Arabia disappear. We have no pagan or polytheistic inscriptions in the 6th century. So by the end of the 5th century, they're gone. All of our inscriptions from the 6th century, from the 500s, before Islam, they're monotheistic. Okay, so this is Al-Jalad calls the 6th century, really maybe the 5th century already, but definitely the 6th century, the monotheistic period. Again, this is before Islam. All of the inscriptions suggest that the Arabs were monotheistic. So there's the point about North Arabia, similar point. There are many monotheistic inscriptions in the Arabic script. More and more are being found. So in Syria, there's one in Zebed, Jebel Sais, Haran. These are all in Syria. In Hima, in the south, we have many inscriptions studied by Christian Robin, a French scholar. And then Ahmad Jalad and Haytham Sidki have studied an inscription very close to Mecca, which seems to be monotheistic, at a place called Rih al-Zalala, only 75 kilometers from Mecca, just down the road. And it seems to have, it uses Quranic language like Barak and Rabb, and seems clearly to be monotheistic. It doesn't have a cross. It's not clear it's Christian, but it's monotheistic. Just maybe as a final thought in this section, and then I think, Anas, I have maybe 7-8 minutes. Is that okay to finish?
Yeah, it is okay, Professor.
Thank you. Shukran. Okay, just a final thought here is, if we turn back to the Quran, we find not only turns of phrase or Christian stories, but we find references to Christians and not Christians one or two, like someone came on a camel and left, but Christian communities. I most famously in Surah 22, you can read there, we have this reference in a positive way. It's a very interesting verse. This surah is interesting because some people say it's Meccan, some people say it's Medinan, but we have positive references to Sawame, which is probably a word from church, for churches. I could say more about this word. Bi'a, which is the standard word for churches, salawat, and masajid. So it's very, very interesting. Okay, so that suggests, I mean, why is the Quran speaking about Sawama, Bi'a, salawat? Why is it speaking about these buildings which have been saved? These buildings that have been saved. Probably because in the area around Mecca, Medina, these buildings existed. There were churches, there were sawa'ma, there were salawat, and of course there were masajid. Okay, even in the famous Surah An-Nur, in the Ayat An-Nur, if you read this passage of Ayat An-Nur, so it doesn't end. The Ayat An-Nur, although people put it on their walls and things, just the ayah, right? But the idea that begins in Ayat An-Nur, this language of God as Nur, um, Nurun ala Nur, yahdi Allahu li nurihi man yasha. All of this image of Zujaja, Azujaja ka'annaha kawkabun duriyun. This image is then continued in the next verse. People usually they love Ayat An-Nur so much, they don't read it in context. Look at verse 36. في بيوت أذن الله أن ترفع ويذكر فيها اسمه. So in houses which God has permitted to be built, in which God's name is recited. But then look at verse 37. Well, who are in these houses? Fi buyutin. Okay, who's in them? Who's men? من الذي في البيوت? من الذي في البيوت? رجال. Who are these رجال? Men who neither commerce nor trafficking diverts from the remembrance of God. Now, there's no way to know for sure, maybe, but it sounds like monks. Men whose whole life is praying to God, not tijara, etc. Their whole life is praying to God. It sounds like monks who are in this biyut. What are the biyut? Well, maybe the biyut are the sawame or the bi'a or the salawat. Okay, so you get my point. Okay, final thing, just 5 minutes, just a quick note on the Quran's theology and Christianity. It's not very, very important, but it's just interesting to note that the presentation of God in the Quran has some attributes which seem to engage with Christian ideas. So one interesting case for me is the methel. So the methel is very, very important to the story of Jesus in the Gospel. So again, these are biblical books from the second half of the Bible, Gospels, Gospel of Matthew, Gospel of Mark, Gospel of Luke. I mean, this is only one example, friends. The Gospels have lots and lots of emthal, right? And so, like, look, Jesus says, Gospel of Matthew, chapter 13, verse 13. This is why I speak to them in emthal, parables. Because seeing they do not see, hearing they do not hear, etc., etc. Okay? And then look, we find in Al-Baqarah, Allah does not shy away from presenting a parable of a gnat, ba'uda, or something above it. And then similarly, he misleads many by it. What is the it? It's the parable, it's the method. right? Method. He guides many by it, but he misleads none but the wrongdoers. Okay? Even in Surah, Ayat an-Nur, which we spoke about, there's a reference to يَضْرِبُ اللَّهُ الْأَمْثَالَ لِلنَّاسِ. Right? So again, amthal. The Quran uses Jesus and only Jesus among all of the prophets to articulate a refutation of Jesus's community. So it's concerned in using Jesus not only as a prophet, but also to have Jesus refute or reject the Christians. Right here, Surah Al-Ma'idah, it's something like, I may get it wrong, forgive me, but ما قلت لهم إلا ما أمرتنا به أن عبدوا الله ربي وربكم, etc., etc. So the Quran is using Jesus as a rad, as a response to Christians. Why this concern to engage with Christians and use the figure of Jesus? Also, it's not here in the PowerPoint, but the only prophet, I believe, when his miracles are mentioned in the Quran, we find the extra phrase, bi'iznillah, is Jesus, right? Moses has miracles, Saleh has miracles, other prophets have miracles. We never find bi'iznillah. Why does the Quran want to add bi'iznillah only with the miracles of Jesus? Probably because there are Christians around who cite those miracles or name those miracles to argue that Jesus is the Son of God. Okay, so I could go on and on, but you've had enough of me. Thank you very much for your patience. The YouTube channel is Exploring the Quran and the Bible. I don't know, Anas, if you can send a link out, maybe, or Fozi at some point. This is me and two of my children looking crazy. Thank you for your patience with me.
Great. Thank you so much, Professor Gabriel, for this very wonderful, insightful, and thought-provoking explanations. And before joined us, so please join me to welcome Professor Sahiran to share his concerns or response to Professor Gabriel's presentation. Dear Professor Sahiran, the floor is yours.
Yeah. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Gabriel Said Reynolds. Yeah. You gave very, amazing presentation in this case. And, we have a lot of information and knowledge about the relation between the Quran and Bible, right? And I'm very sorry to my the sign of my internet was very bad, and therefore I couldn't follow your presentation from the beginning, right? So yes, I think Professor Gabriel has already spoken. It's related to what we have in the in the a theory of or linguistic theory that is intertextuality. So, namely, the every text has relation to other texts, right? The Quran has relation to, for example, to Bible, the Jewish text, and so on and so forth, right? So, The origins of this approach can be traced back to, in relation to the Quran, the Quranic studies, traced back to the 19th century scholars like Abraham Geiger, and of course other scholars who introduced the borrowing lending paradigm to explain similarities between several aspects of the Quran and the Bible, the Old Testament. Geiger's work reflected to reflected the methodologies of old philology, driven by the desire to uncover an old text or original source. But this kind of, this approach, intertextual approach in, studying any text, of course, has been developed from time to time, from generation to generation. And I'm sure that, this approach has been used by scholars for different purposes. Some scholars, utilize this. Utilize this approach in order to say that certain texts is influenced by other texts, for example, like Abraham Geiger, right? Abraham Geiger said that the Prophet Muhammad, took several aspects from Jewish texts in order to, construct the Quran. And there are other scholars use this approach, intertextual approach, in order to search for example, something in order to be able to compare one text to another, to reach, let's say, right understanding of certain texts in a discussion, right? So in Islamic societies, Islamic Muslim scholars, have difficulties in doing such kind of, approach in understanding the Quran, because they believe that the Quran was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, from God to the Prophet Muhammad. So we know that the Prophet Muhammad, didn't, according to Islamic tradition, didn't, did not study, for example, the Old Testament or New Testament. Yes, he probably got the information, several informations in relation, information about, for example, a certain aspect of Christianity or, Judaism. But I think when we look at the, the biography of the Prophet Muhammad, I think he did not enough. He did not enough to, to learn many things from Christianity and Judaism. Therefore, we call the Prophet Muhammad is the Ummi prophet. The Ummi meaning he didn't learn other didn't have time to learn Christianity and Judaism in in a comprehensive way. So it is very difficult for Muslim scholars to 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 use such intertextuality in order to say that the Prophet Muhammad created or let's say produced the Quran on the basis of his experience in learning or studying Christianity and Judaism. So yes, but for me, this such kind of method or approach, intertextual approach, for me myself, can be used for in order for getting the original meaning or a historical meaning or original meaning of a certain word in the Quran. So by looking at, for example, by comparing, comparing, for example, a certain word in the Quran and the same or similar words in the Bible or a Jewish text, yeah, of course, yeah. So yeah, I have a certain method in order to understand the Quran. That is called Magna cum Magza approach. Magna cum Magza approach, in which somebody tries to grasp, first of all, the meaning, the historical meaning of a text, of a Quranic text, Quranic words, Quranic phrase, and so on and so forth. And the second one is to understand, to grasp the what I call al-maghza al-tarihi, historical significance of a text for the Prophet Muhammad and his companions. So, and the last one is the al-maghza al-mutaharrik al-mu'asir, the significant dynamic contemporary significance of a certain verse, certain of the Quran for current time, for this this period, and also of course in the future. So one point is very important in my approach is is that somebody must try to grasp the original meaning of the text or historical meaning. So in one strategy that can be done in order to this, in order to to grasp the historical meaning of a text, is in addition to linguistic analysis, and also intratextuality approach, is that also we can use intertextuality, meaning that we try to compare certain words, phrase, or terms, or everything here with other texts like the Bible and Jewish text. So for me, this what Professor Gabriel Said said is, of course, very important for us. Very important for us to to take or to grasp the original meaning of a certain words, certain phrases, and so on and so forth. So this is my general comment. Of course, I'm sorry. I'm very sorry to not to provide not providing any certain, specific article in this case. But I'm happy. I'm very happy to hear from, Professor Gabriel Said. Yeah, because I got many very important, information. So, yes, thank you very much, and have a, the participant can ask, can raise some questions to him in relation to the relation between the Quran and the Bible. Thank you very much, and have a good good evening for Indonesian, and then yeah, I think in America it's still in the morning, right? So
Yes.
okay, thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Sahiran, for his thought. And now we are continuing our discussions. Now I will open the floor for the participants, for all audiences to ask questions. But before that, let me try to give brief summary of Professor Gabriel's presentation in Bahasa Indonesia to make sure that every one of us can understand the general points of his presentation. Jadi Professor Gabriel, I'm sorry Professor, I speak in Bahasa Indonesia.
Please, no problem at all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you Profesor. Jadi Profesor Gabriel bicara tentang komunitas Christianity di Arab sebelum kemunculan agama Islam yang dibawa oleh Nabi Muhammad. Jadi beliau pertama melakukan survei literatur bahwa literatur sebelumnya tidak memberikan porsi yang dominan terhadap peran para orang-orang Kristen sebelumnya, misalnya Haunting atau Aziz Al-Azmeh yang terbaru berpendapat bahwa monoteisme agama Islam itu terbentuk karena sudah ada dalam kultur Arab sendiri sudah ada revolutionary movement yang mencoba sudah mulai berpindah dari paganisme menuju monoteisme. Jadi konteks seperti ini yang membuat agama Islam bisa berkembang dan diterima masyarakat Arab secara lebih kuat karena sudah ada dalam kultur Arab itu ada dimensi-dimensi itu. Tapi Profesor Gabriel tidak terlalu sepakat dengan statement tersebut karena beliau juga berpendapat bahwa monoteisme Arab ini bukan murni dari kalangan Arab sendiri, tapi juga ada hasil interaksi dengan komunitas Christianity. Jadi untuk menunjukkan adanya interaksi dengan komunitas Christianity yang berbahasa Syriac atau bahasa Aramaik, ini dua bahasa namanya berbeda tapi sama, Profesor Gabriel memberikan contoh dalam Al-Quran ada beberapa frase yaitu familiar bagi kalangan Christianity, misalnya hatta yalijal jamalu fi samil khiyat, qulubuna ghul, sami'na wa asaina, dan seterusnya. Tadi banyak teman-teman nanti bisa dilihat lagi rekamannya. Terus beliau juga menunjukkan ada kayak post biblical writings, kayak misalnya apa ini yang tersebar secara oral, misalnya kayak kisah sujudnya malaikat kepada Nabi Adam itu tidak ada dalam Bible, tapi ada dalam tradisi oralnya mereka, dan Al-Quran juga mengisahkan bahwa malaikat itu sujud kepada Nabi Adam dan seterusnya dan seterusnya. Jadi ada interaksi antara Al-Quran dengan tradisi oral yang berkembang saat itu. Terus Profesor Gabriel juga sempat menyinggung bahwa kemungkinan di Mekah saat itu ada dua bahasa yang digunakan, Arabic and Aramaic. Terus beliau menunjukkan ada artikel David Bertaina dan seterusnya dan seterusnya. Dan beliau juga membawa ke konteks yang lebih luas, ada kerajaan Bizantium yang berbahasa Greek. Terus Profesor Gabriel juga ada membahas tentang pre-Islamic basmalah, misalnya inskripsi di South Arabian konteks. Dan sudah ada mulai kehilangan elemen-elemen pagan. Terus Profesor Gabriel juga tadi menyebutkan ayat tentang cahaya tadi ya, surah apa bahwa konteksnya itu ada fi buyutin apa tadi ayatnya, terus di sana ada komunitas yang menyembah yang mendedikasikan dirinya kepada Tuhan, dan ini mungkin ada merujuk kepada monks atau para rahib, para biarawan kata Profesor Gabriel. Tapi sebelum menutup beliau juga mengatakan bahwa Al-Quran meskipun ada kesamaan dengan tradisi biblikal, tapi Al-Quran juga mengembangkan its own Quranic theology. Jadi ada kesamaan, tapi juga ada Al-Quran menggunakan tradisi biblikal untuk its own purpose, untuk tujuannya tersendiri, seperti itu. Itu secara umum. Pak Sehran juga mendukung bahwa kajian intertekstual itu bisa mengungkap original meaning, dan itu original meaning bisa dipakai untuk menggunakan metode makna kumakza beliau. Okay, thank you so much, Professor Gabriel, for being patient to listen to our Indonesian speaking. I'm very sorry. So now we have one friend who raised, or two friends who raised their hands, and I'm gonna give this time to Muhammad Ra first, and then Muhammad Azwar Khairul. Please give your question as concisely as possible. Please, Muhammad Ra.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm really sorry because I'm currently working on the restaurants. So I'm really sorry for the noise in the background. I have two questions. Actually, going to ask about your opinion, Professor Gabriel's opinion on the out of Hijaz theory posed by social maker, including Professor Sinai's latest article, Christian elephant in the microphone. You already answered the question, so I feel like it was unnecessary to answer that. But another question regarding the Ethiopian Christians. When we discuss about Ethiopian words that was borrowed into the Quran by its author. Hello.
Hello, Muhammad Ra, have you done? We are very sorry that we cannot hear you very clearly, but you have written.
I see also Mr. Muhammad's comment in the chat.
Yes.
So I can respond to that as well. And I heard some of his question as he just stated. Is that okay if I respond to that?
The first question is unnecessary to answer. You don't have to answer because I feel like that you already answered the first question in your presentation. So probably my question is on the second one.
On the Ethiopian.
Yep.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much, Muhammad. Very glad to connect with you. And Anas, I'm very sorry, but I need to go in 15 minutes. So I'll keep my answers very brief. Okay. So first of all, Mr. Muhammad is right to point out the importance you'll see in the chat of the article of Nikolai Sinai. Also, his book, Key Terms in the Quran, is very, very important. I'm with Nikolai on this completely. I think that there is no reason to argue, as Shoemaker does, that the engagement with Christianity means that the Quran developed in Palestine. I think there was Christianity in the Hijaz. And one important argument Sinai makes, Muhammad, I think you know, it shows you know from your question, is that the Quran does not only engage with Aramaic, but also with Ethiopic. So as Sinai notes, the very interesting word used for the companions of Jesus in the Quran is Hawariyun. Now, the Mufassirun have their own idea connected to the Arabic meaning of the word, but from my perspective, that comes from Ethiopic. That is the Ethiopic word used for for Jesus's companions. There are other cases too of Ethiopic. So that's a good argument for the Quran coming from, exactly as Islamic tradition says, Mecca and Medina, because we know the Ethiopic presence in that part of Arabia was important.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Professor Gabriel. And we will give this time to Muhammad Azwar to ask his question, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Anas, for the opportunity. Hello, Professor Gabriel. It's such an honor meeting you here. By the way, I'm your subscriber. I have subscribed to your YouTube long time ago. I have several questions, but that you have answered one question from Muhammad Ra. Where exactly the first contact of Christianity and Islam, the area of first contact of Christianity and Islam, and it's there are another materiality that we could elaborate rather than language interconnections, such what Stephen Schumacher mentioned about the apocalypse doctrine that's come from Byzantium Empire. So what do you think about that? And the second question is, it's maybe not a provocations, but I'm happy to hear directly from you. So what do you think about Joseph Lumbert say that such of typical studies like antiquity is a part of decoloniality?
You said Joseph Lombard? Did you say
Yeah,
Lombard? Okay.
Joseph Lumbert. There is no another chance to understand Quran, what come after it? Is there's no chance? What you mentioned before, that understanding Quran is we should understand it before coming.
Great
Is
question.
there? Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, shukran, Muhammad Aswar. Let me apologize to everyone too that I cannot even speak a little in Bahasa. So forgive me. This is hopefully, inshallah, in the coming years, I'll learn at least some Bahasa. So thank you, Muhammad Aswar, for the question. If it's okay, I think I'll focus on the decoloniality. Is that okay? Because time is short on the second question. To speak about the apocalyptic argument of Shoemaker, that would take some time. So if that's okay, if you don't mind, let me speak about decoloniality and Quranic studies. The first point is, there are different modes of engaging in academic conversations. One focuses on the person, the scholar, and the role of the scholar in producing arguments, the social, political implications of the arguments, Muhammad Aswar. So the focus is on the person. So on Gabriel, for example, Gabriel is not a Muslim. Gabriel is white. Gabriel is American. Maybe Gabriel has Christian Arabic background. His middle name is Saeed. So what can I know about Gabriel? What is his goal? What is the social or political mission Gabriel has? So that's one kind of mode. And some scholars like to, in that mode, focus on colonialism and decolonialism. So Gabriel, because he is white, because he's American, because he's non-Muslim, because he teaches at a Catholic university, whatever reason it might be, because he likes American football, he's part of a colonial project. So this is one mode of speaking. This is very problematic to me, whether it's about Gabriel or maybe I say, oh, Muhammad Aswar is from Indonesia. He's from a Muslim background. He maybe never studied the Bible because he focused on Arabic and usul al-fiqh and furul al-fiqh and these things, tajweed. So, right? So then I say, oh, Muhammad Aswar, can I trust him? This, to me, is very problematic, whether it's about Gabriel or Muhammad Aswar. But, so the other mode is to talk about ideas, the text and ideas. That's the mode that interests me. But I agree, Muhammad Aswar, that it's very interesting and very important to speak about meaning, like the question of meaning. So let's say Gabriel says, Ayat al-Nur, refers to maybe with biyut, الذي يذكر فيها اسم الله. Maybe this means it's a reference to monks, churches, monasteries. Okay, fine. Or maybe Gabriel says this word hawariyun comes from Ethiopic. Fine. But what does the text mean? I mean, this is a theological question, right? So exactly as Professor Sahiran said, you can do sort of detailed work, this word, that word, but that's not the end of the story. So I respect very much that believers in God have the theological work of thinking about the meaning of the text. The Quran still speaks about rahmah. What is rahmah? What does it mean that God is Rahim? What does this mean for our understanding of humans in God's relationship to humans? I mean, these are the big questions. And these are the questions for Muslims, not only for the ulama, but for you and your brother, if you have one, your mother, maybe your children. I mean, these are big questions that are very, very important. So my work is just the historical critical work, but it does not eliminate or replace the theological work.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Professor Gabriel, for your answer and for Muhammad Azwar for your questions. So, because we almost reached to the end of our discussions, we would like to listen to Professor Gabriel for his some kind of closing statement. Maybe he can emphasize the importance of studying Sharia or Hebrew languages to understand the Quran, and what does he think about the use of the Islamic traditions. Maybe we can still use that for another research project, such as to understand Islamic intellectual traditions. So we would like to listen this from you also, Professor Gabriel.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Anas. I'll speak just 2 or 3 minutes, two closing thoughts. But let me just add right here. Thank you to everyone for coming on a Saturday evening. Thank you for your patience with me. I know the presentation was not perfect. You've been very, very patient with me. So 2 maybe closing points. One is about ambiguity in the text, ambiguity in meaning generally. So to me, in the study of any text, maybe Shakespeare, any text, it's important to think about ambiguity and meaning. When someone says in English, I love you, what does this mean? It could be between friends. My friend Chris from my high school say, I love you. This has a meaning. It could be with my wife, I love you, it has another meaning. Or with my mother, I love you, another meaning. Or I could say to an enemy, I love you, with sarcasm, and it has the opposite meaning. So it's just important, I think, in the study of the Quran or any text, to be attentive to philosophical questions of language. Like I said in response to Muhammad Azwar, like, what is rahmah? What is wali? Awliya? What does it mean that God is wali al-mu'mineen? What does that word mean? So, this is in the tafsir, but we can also benefit from philosophical studies, what we call hermeneutics, engaging with that whole question, language and meaning. So this is one suggestion. And then the second suggestion is that it's very important for Quranic studies to study the Bible. So this is not an argument to leave Islam and become a Christian or a Jew, not at all. There's a lot to be gained, and for understandable reasons, in the course of Islamic tradition, generally the ulama told us, do not study the Bible. So if you look in the modern period at many figures, like Rashid Ridda or Muhammad al-Ghazali or Yusuf al-Qaradawi, great scholars, brilliant scholars, right? I've chosen 3 scholars who worked in Egypt, although Rashid Ridda was Syrian. But they tell us constantly, do not study the Bible. The Bible is muharraf. Only study the Bible for da'wah. Only do it for da'wah when you want to argue. But do not study it to understand the Quran. I understand this because we have a long history of conflict between Christianity and Islam. So it's understandable. There's worries about the Bible. But in fact, the Quran is not part of Hinduism or Buddhist tradition, which you have this beautiful tradition in Indonesia of Hinduism and Buddhism. The Quran does not come from this tradition. The Quran speaks about prophets and heaven and hell. It speaks about Christians. It speaks about Jews. It even speaks about monks and priests, ruhban, khasisin. So it's engaging in this biblical world. So there's a lot to be gained by studying the Bible. And otherwise, thank you, Anas. Thank you, Muhammad. Thank you, Fawzi. Again, thanks to everyone connected to the Istiqlal Mosque. It's been an honor being with you.
Thank you, Professor. So before we close our event today, the organizer requests us to take pictures together, if you don't mind, Professor. So please, all participants, if you can please open your video. Teman-teman, silahkan dibuka kameranya. Nanti akan dipandu oleh Mas Fauzi untuk pengambilan fotonya, kenang-kenangan. Monggo, Mas Fauzi. Thank you very much, Professor Gabriel. Thank you for joining us, all participants. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you so much for the insightful and also remarkable explanation from Professor Gabriel, Seth Reynolds, and also the Mas Anas Salih Mukhlisin, and also the keynote speaker last time from the Professor Sahiran Shamsuddin. So, ladies and gentlemen, so our agenda ran well without any obstacles, and we has got the appreciation. So we extend to our deepest appreciations to all incredible speakers and participants, especially for Professor Gabriel Selternold and the Professor Dr. Philosophy Sahirun Samsudin, and also for the moderator, Mr. Anas Mukhlisin. And we say thank you so much for the institutions and also the community of the academic in Islamic and Quranic studies for their valuable collaborations. And thank you so much for you all. Let's close by reciting Alhamdulillah together. 1, 2, 3. Alhamdulillahirrahmanirrahim. And thank you so much for all the participants that has followed for about 200 participants here last time. It's so amazing. It's so wonderful and insightful, the webinar. Thank you so much for all. You can leave the Zoom. Thank you.
Makasih ya. Izin leave.
Makasih, Kana. Don't forget, untuk teman-teman silakan nanti bisa tonton yang belum ikut tadi atau ketinggalan di stay tune di YouTube Elbrand Stock, dan karena ini adalah akhir sesi, Jadi silakan tunggu sesi-sesi atau program-program nextnya lagi dari Albram Stop. So stay tuned in our social media, Instagram, di WA maupun di YouTube. Dan temukan bahwasanya kajian tafsir versi kita itu menarik semuanya. Thank you.